Previously on This Old Tony. I'm not sure where these things come from, but these little marvels of engineering, they are constant force. That means no matter how much I push them, that's 30 pounds. Still 30 pounds. Still 30 pounds. Just pause the video and think about that. Presently on This Old Tony. Judging by the comments and the thousands of letters I've received in the mail, the gas spring in that over center video really spurred some interest. Some even went so far as to challenge my claim that they're constant force, ostensibly calling me a liar. Now I ask you, would a liar even know what ostensibly means, let alone use it in a sentence? Get out of here. Let's find out, shall we? I'll sacrifice one on the altar of science, take it apart, and we'll have a look inside to see how, or if, they work. One way or another, we're getting to the bottom of this. Before we send this poor thing off to the great hardware store in the sky, let's do a quick recap. A little deeper than last time, but not too deep. That'd get dull. Here are a small assortment of springs that fit in frame. These happen to be compression springs, which means they're meant to be compressed, not pulled on. Not because they wouldn't work if you pulled on them, but there are no features on them that you could pull with, like this one. This has little ears you can grab onto and pull, like when you're trying to be the fun uncle but just end up making someone cry and get sent home from the family picnic. These are meant to be pushed, compressed. Someone boring a long time ago decided that compression spring was a better name than squeezy spring, so here we are. Here's a fun but totally unrelated side quest for you. If you have one, go have a look at your storm door. Odds are you'll find a spring on a chain that looks something like this. Look closely and you'll notice there's a compression spring in there. And some absolute lunatic went to a lot of trouble adding extra parts to turn that compression spring into an extension spring, to make a compression spring work like an extension spring. So I ask you, why didn't they just use an extension spring? If you know, leave a comment down below or send me your answer on the back of a postcard. Now, it doesn't take a rich storm door owner to notice all these springs are different. And even without pressing on your screen, I bet you can tell just by looking that some of these are stronger than others. This one is big, but it's pretty wimpy. These, despite being strawberry and banana flavor, are smaller, but a lot stronger. The point here is, in addition to the size, shape, length, or flavor, springs have another very important characteristic: spring rate. In fact, I'd wager it's the most important. Like if you're building something with a spring, the first thing you probably know, whether you realize it or not, is the spring rate you want, the force you need it to develop when it moves. Then you go looking for sizes and lengths that fit what you're trying to do. Now, of course, you won't find the spring you want, so you give and take a little on your spring rate and look again. You do that a few times while you acclimate to the terror of realizing you probably have to make your own custom spring. Luckily, there's a video for that. In fact, and I'm sure I don't need to tell anybody this, when you found yourself window shopping for nice springs, one of the first things you notice is the rate. Now have a look here. These are all 1-inch tall springs, all the same height. You might start thinking to yourself, I need a dozen 1-inch springs for my prototype jumpy shoes. But these 1-inch springs go from a rate of, 2 or 3 pounds per inch clear up to 500 plus pounds per inch. That's quite a difference. 500-pound spread is the difference between elegantly clearing your neighbor's fence like a gazelle to breaking both ankles without even leaving the ground. Short story long, spring rate means exactly what it sounds like. It's the rate or the strength of the spring in pounds per inch. A 1-pound spring would take 1 pound of force to compress it 1 inch, 2 pounds of forces to compress it 2 inches, 3 pounds to compress 3, etc. For a 1-pound spring, every inch will need a pound of force. If you've got a 25-pound spring, every inch will require 25 pounds. After 2 inches, you're looking at 50 pounds. So awesome. The more you push, or the more you pull them, the more force they make. Excellent. Just beautiful. 95% of the time. The other 5% of the time, you don't want the force to change. In fact, it would be absolutely catastrophic if it did. I just know you're sitting there staring at your screen not believing me, so let's try to walk through this with maybe some simple examples. Exhibit A. Let's say you were inventing a retractable tape measure like this one. You want it to be retractable, so you're going to need either some really weird magnets or more than likely a spring of some kind. But with a regular spring, the more you pull the tape, the harder it's going to get. If this had a 1 pound per inch spring in it, I'd be pulling with 11 pounds, 12 pounds, 13 pounds. You'd have to get 5 of your strongest friends over if you wanted to measure 15 feet. I did some digging around my scrap pile, but unfortunately don't have a minivan sliding door to show you, so I ask you use your imagination. Some of those are spring assisted, but just like this tape measure, you would want a spring that's just enough force to offset the weight of the door throughout its whole range. You'd want a constant force spring with as flat as a spring rate as you could find. Using a regular spring that develops more force as you move it would turn your minivan door into an absolute bear trap. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that wouldn't be cool. There are only 2 types of springs that I know, or that I can think of right now. I could have sworn there was a third, but there are only 2 types of springs that I know that provide a constant force. There are power springs, like the one used in tape measures, in big sliding doors, stuff like tool balancers. They're pretty cool and probably deserve their own video, but I've assembled you here today to talk about the other white meat, the other constant force spring, the gas spring. 30 pounds, 30 pounds. 30 pounds. You'd expect this thing to be filled and made with magic, but really what you see is what you get. It's a sleeve, like a cylinder, with a rod and a piston on the inside, and the whole thing full of pressurized nitrogen. That's really it. Almost. You thought you got me there, didn't you? I mean, that really is all that's in there. But if it were just the piston cylinder setup you're imagining, and we just have a piston and a seal pushing down on some gas, well, it most certainly would not be constant force. Just look at this one. It would be impossible to get this kind of a stroke out of a classic pressurized piston, if nothing else were going on. Spoiler alert, something else is going on. Think about putting your finger on the end of a syringe, plugging the exit. You don't get very far trying to push that plunger down. Not to mention, the forces go through the roof pretty freaking fast. And that is the opposite of constant force. Ergo factoid, something else must be going on. And it's probably something sneaky. Perhaps even shady. Before I open this thing up, a word of warning. Maybe even more than one. If you didn't hear it the first 10 times, this has pressurized gas in it. Playing stupid games with these is not smart. And at the very top of that list is cutting one open. I don't know what this is charged to, but it's probably in the 500 to 600 psi range. Did you get that? 500 to 600 psi. That's 40 something bar for the international crowd. To put that in perspective, the tires on your car right now are like 25 psi. That's 20 times less than this little gas spring, holding up your entire car. What I'm saying is, be careful, don't stupid. To anyone rushing to the comment section right now, writing that car tires are 30 to 35 psi and not 25 psi, come on, who are you kidding? When's the last time you checked your tire pressure? It's a lot easier to divide 500 by 25 than it is 35. All right, let's do this. These are special high pressure gas spring gloves. It's probably good a place as any. This side is empty. You'd expect that. This side, there's the piston. That's a bit anticlimactic, eh? Disappointing even. Just looks like a rod with a piston and a seal maybe. This wouldn't create a constant force like we were promised. I mean, where's the magic? Did we let it out? My bench doesn't feel wet. You guessed it, it's arts and crafts time. Everyone's favorite part of the show. To explain what we're looking at, I have to bring you behind the curtain. I'll tell you right now, you're gonna feel let down. Ripped off even. It's like when you learn how a magic trick works. It's always a letdown, and you're gonna hate me, and that's okay. But then the real magic happens. The more you think about what you're about to see, your anger will turn to disbelief, and then to pure wonder. Let's talk about piston cylinders. We're gonna have to make this quick. My wife's flowers are already wilting. This is a cylinder. If I've lost you already, see my video on cylinders. And this is a piston, the pancake looking part with the expensive seals. The part I'm holding on to, the stick, is the piston rod. It's just a way to connect the piston to the outside world. The piston goes in the cylinder, and there's a cap, sometimes called a head, maybe a gland, whatever. It's just a cap that keeps the piston from flying out. I think it's pretty intuitive that if I were to drill a hole down here near the bottom and blow air in there, it'd make the piston and rod move up. The bottom volume pressurizes, and that pressure pushes the piston up. If I had a hole at the top and moved my line up there, blew air up there, the top volume would fill and push the piston and rod back down. Now, of course, whichever way that piston is going, in order for it to move up and down, the pressure on the other side has to be vented. Right? If I blow in the bottom, but the top has nowhere to fart the air out, the piston can't really move up there. And that's exactly how cylinders work. Be they air or oil, a pressurized fluid goes in and pushes a piston. That piston pushes a rod, which does some sort of useful work. Hopefully. Get a load of these. That's an order. These are two small industrial pneumatic cylinders. They run on air. That's a 1/2 inch bore, and this is maybe 1 inch. This larger one, just like our arts and crafts project, has 2 ports. Blow air in the back, the piston rod comes out. Send that air now to the front, and it goes back. Pretty cool, huh? But just like the syringe, if I block one of these ports and I try to move the piston rod, I can't really get it to go. I'm sort of creating a suction, not letting any air in, so it can't move. You can hear the air being pushed out of these as I alternate pushing the piston rod. This is a double acting cylinder. This cute little guy is single acting. There's only one air port. Put air in there. Okay, not very graceful, but that was pretty cool, right? Single acting, because in addition to a piston and a rod, there's also a spring at the top of this one. So if I pull it out, the spring will bring it back. But again, in order to move up, it's got to clear the air ahead of the piston, and maybe you can see that little bleed hole there. If I cover that, I can't really get this piston rod out because I'm trying to compress air. All right, cool. 1 port, single acting, 2 port, dual acting. But our gas spring over here has no ports at all. Not only that, it has no bleed holes. But slow down there, partner. Let's get back to our butter churner over here. There's just one more thing we need to talk about. And believe me when I say this, this next part is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. We have to bring a little math into this. Not maths, mind you. Don't make that mistake. Just one math. I know. We were having such a good time, but don't sweat it. It is super easy. Till now, we've been throwing the words pressure and force around like it's our birthday. Okay, I don't know exactly what that means, but let's get on the same page. I think everybody here knows what a force is. For that matter, I'm sure everybody knows what pressure is, but bear with me. Pressure and force are related. You could almost argue they're the same thing. But we define pressure as a force over an area. A force is just a force. A pressure is some amount of force spread over an area. Mathing that out would look something like this. Pressure equals force divided by the area that it's on. In our case, force is in pounds, and area is in square inches. So we're measuring pressure in pounds per square inch, or PPSI. Since you shouldn't say PP in serious board meetings, we call it just PSI. If we want to do an example, putting 10 pounds on 2 square inches, well, 10 divided by 2 is 5, so you get 5 PSI of pressure. Awesome. I'm getting goosebumps just for the heck of it. Let's math a little backwards now. If pressure is force divided by an area, that means force is pressure times an area. The same relationship, we just move things around a little bit. If we know the pressure and we know the area, we can figure out the force. Now that we all understand the deepest secrets of the universe, let's figure out how much force my pneumatic cylinder from Michaels could generate if we plugged in, say, 90 psi right from the air compressor. We inject 90 psi air in the bottom, and it does what you'd expect. It sort of would extend. Now the compressed air fills up the bottom chamber and pushes on everything in there, like tries to fill it up like a balloon. We've got that 90 psi on the walls, the bottom, and underneath our piston. Hopefully, this cylinder can withstand those pressures so it does not move. The piston, on the other hand, can slide up and down. If we take a closer, some might argue more vulgar look at the bottom side of our piston is about 4 inches in diameter. So that means it has an area of about 12 square inches. A little more, but whatever. So easy enough. 90 psi times 12 square inches equals about 1,000 pounds. 1,080 pounds of force. 90 psi that your cheap Walmart air compressor will have no problem doing on a 4-inch diameter piston generates over 1,000 pounds of force. Pretty impressive, right? So our piston, now with fluid pressure in the bottom, is extended. We just, I don't know, pushed a boulder or accidentally knocked the kid off his bike with 1,000 pounds of force, and now we want to help them back up. Or maybe pull that boulder a little closer. Let's retract the piston. We open the port on the bottom and simultaneously sort of reroute our pressurized air into the imaginary port at the top. The top volume starts to fill, pressure builds, and now the piston and rod start moving the other way. We're pushing on the other side. But let's have a closer look at the top side of the piston. It's still the same 4-inch diameter piston, but have a closer look. On this side, there's a piston rod attached, which is robbing us of some of this surface area. This piston rod is about 1.5 inches diameter, so its cross-section, that area that it's robbing, is almost 2 inches. Not quite, but close enough. So while this side has an area of 12 square inches, this side loses 2 of those because of the piston. So there's only 10 square inches left. So 90 psi times 10 square inches is 900 pounds. That's 100 pounds less than the push, actually closer to 200 pounds less. The presence of this piston rod results in less area and so less force on the pull stroke compared to the push stroke. There's more area on this side for the pressurized fluid to push than there is on this side. And that is true for all fluid power piston cylinders, be it air powered like this one, hydraulic oil, or pressurized barbecue sauce. You always have less force on the piston rod side. Every decision you and I have made in our lives, every choice, has led to this most singular, magnificent convergence. That is the moment where we learn how a constant force gas spring actually works. And I'm going to answer that question by asking you a question, mostly because I'm a jerk. Keep in mind everything we've talked about so far. Go back and start the video over again if you've already forgotten. Based on all that jazz about pressure, force, and area, what do you think would happen if I just drilled a hole straight through this piston? Go ahead, dare me. Do you dare? Dang it. If this were an actuator, if it were an air hydraulic cylinder, well, we just destroyed it, I can tell you that much. The equivalent of slashing someone's tires. But this ain't no actuator. This is a gas spring. No ports in the side, it's completely sealed, and it's full of pressurized gas. So what happens now? The pressurized gas can go right through that hole in the piston, no problem. But what the gas can't do is get out of the cylinder. On the bottom of the piston, we still have 12 inches of movable area. Imagine that hole we just drilled was pretty small. But we still have 12 inches under there. So there's still 1,080 pounds pushing the piston and rod up. But compared to what we had before, the gas is now also on the other side because of the hole. And on that side, it's got 10 square inches of movable area. 10 times 90, there's 900 pounds pushing down. If we've got 1,080 pounds pushing up and 900 pounds pushing down, well, the net effect is 180 pounds pushing up. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the 180-pound gas spring. Let's put this another way. If we move the piston down here, close to the bottom, what do we have? Well, there's still 1080 up minus 900 down. That's 180 pounds pushing up. If we move the piston up here close to the top, what about there? Well, it's still 1080 pounds minus 900 pounds pushing which way? Anyone? That's right, still up. No matter where this piston is in the cylinder, it's pushing the rod up, or out, I guess, with 180 pounds of force. It's, say it with me now, constant. And this is exactly what we have here. Maybe every manufacturer makes these their own way, I don't know. I mean, it's not like I go snapping through every gas cylinder I see. But in this one, there is no hole in the piston. I mean, those plastic parts, I don't think they're meant to be seals. They're likely just bushings to keep the rod moving nice and smooth. They're certainly not airtight up against the cylinder walls. But in this one, they did the hole through the piston just a little different. Let me see how I can show this to you. There's a seam in the cylinder wall. Maybe you can make it out there. We're going to be looking at the inside of that seam. When they manufacture the cylinder wall, they leave kind of like a little tunnel, for lack of a better word. That is the quote-unquote hole through the piston. It's an easy way for gas to get around to both sides of that piston. Pretty cool, huh? So that's it. That rhetorical question is the best way I can think of wrapping this up. Pretty cool indeed. But one more thing before you leave. Gas springs, strictly speaking, are not constant force. Not strictly constant. In the last video, when I said constant force, there was a little asterisk next to the text. If you clicked on that asterisk, it brings you here. You see, there's one wrinkle in all of this. When the piston is all the way at the bottom like this, we have almost the entire piston rod inside of the cylinder. When the piston rod is all the way at the top, we have very little, almost no piston rod in there. It's all sticking out the front. Remember, this gas spring is completely sealed. So at the bottom of the stroke, all of that piston rod in there is taking up space. Space that otherwise gas would have had to stretch its legs. Because in this closed position, like the retracted position, we have less space in the cylinder for the gas to hang out, the pressure inside goes up just a little bit. Maybe this is charged to 90 psi there, but when we introduce all of that piston rod, maybe the pressure goes up to 95 or 100 psi. So the force profile of a constant force gas spring does change a bit through the stroke. About 10, maybe 15%. That's not insignificant, sure, but small enough compared to other types of springs that we just call them constant force. In conclusion, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, well, it's probably time to replace that gas spring. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching. Here's another gas spring. Totally works. It's a little old, but it works. I'm going to drill a hole in here and let all the gas out. Again, don't try this at home. It's dangerous. I'm going to do this here in the mill because it has power feed. All right, I think we should be good. You might want to squint your eyes a little, but you watch closely and I'll be right here with you the whole time. This thing is now broken. We let all the gas out. No more spring force. There's some oil in these things too. You may see some squirt out. Keeps them lubed. Helps with the cylinder seal probably. Also, I think does some damping at the ends. But we let all the gas out, and now here's the trick question. The pressure inside is now atmospheric. I don't know where you live, but for me, that means 14.7 psi. And just like before, that 14.7 psi is acting on both sides of the piston in here. Do you remember earlier when we subtracted the area of the bottom from the area of the top of the piston? Like we took this area and we subtracted this area. If you think about it, that's just the cross-sectional area of the piston rod. If you subtract the bottom area by the top area, you're left with the area the piston rod is taking up. Yes, I could have just said that to begin with and avoided all the dumb math, but taking the long way makes us just a little bit richer inside. So the pushing force is just the charge pressure times the area, the cross-sectional area of this rod. So this piston rod is what, 3/8 inch in diameter. That means it has an area of 0.12 square inches. Atmospheric pressure coming in through this hole, 14.7 psi, times 0.12 square inches equals somewhere around 1.5 pounds of force. 1.5 pounds of force pushing outwards. So maybe you see where we're going. Why isn't this piston rod trying to push its way out anymore? If you think you can explain that, leave a comment down below.